All right, good morning, church. It's good to see you here today. We already had a good Sunday school lesson this morning, and if you're not part of a home group or a Sunday school, I'd encourage you to become part of one and come join us in the morning. We can keep putting more and more chairs out as we need, as more people come. We had a real good study this morning, and I thank John for leading that study this morning, and all those that participated. Today we're going to be in Proverbs. It's going to be in chapter 7. It's going to be in verse 6 through the end of the chapter. So Proverbs chapter 7, and then verse 6 through 27. In this verse here, these verses, we don't really know. It's not really told to us if Solomon is talking about himself or if he's actually witnessing a young man. Nevertheless, it really leads to what God's led me to talk to you about today. So starting in verse 6, at the window of my house, this is Solomon talking, at the window of my house I looked out through the lattice. I saw among the simple. I noticed a young man, a youth who lacked judgment. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. She is loud and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares. At every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face she said, I have fellowship offerings at home. Today I have fulfilled my vows, so I came out to meet you. I looked for you and have found you. I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink deep of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. My husband is not home. He has gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and won't be home till full moon. With persuasive words she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her like an ox going to slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces its liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. And we'll be coming back to these verses in just a little bit and break them down a little bit more. But the verse I want you to look at is... Look at verse 25 and then the last word, paths there, or path, because that's really what the Lord has led me to speak to you about today. The principle of the path, it's called a principle because it's different than a rule or a law. You know, a rule or a law, they can be broken, but a principle cannot be broken. The principle of the path, it's in effect whether you believe it or not, or whether you want to admit it or not, or whether you even realize it or not. Think about highways or roads or even a path. They lead where they lead regardless of who's on it. Okay, now that may seem obvious, right? But a road's going to lead where it leads regardless of who's on it. Maybe something that's not so obvious, though, is that same principle applies in other ways other than just geographically. It also applies relationally, financially, spiritually, and so forth. The same principle applies. When you think about principles, we mentioned they're different than rules. So another principle to think about is like the principle of the harvest. You're going to reap what you sow, right? So if you plant watermelon seeds, you're going to reap watermelons. You're going to grow watermelons. If you plant squash seeds, you're going to grow squash. And that same principle applies to all areas of our lives, as we will see going forward. How many of you seen the movie The Wizard of Oz? Anybody seen that movie? Most people in here, right? Who knows when it came out? Nobody was probably around when it came out. Oh, we have somebody. Great job. 1939. Awesome. 1939, The Wizard of Oz came out. I was expecting nobody to get that. I had to look it up. They still play that movie. About once a year they play The Wizard of Oz, and I've seen it many times, and most of you probably know the plot, but you have Dorothy and her dog Toto. They get swept up in this in tornado, and they get dropped in a place that they don't know where they're at, and they don't know how to get home. She just wants to get home, and she meets Glinda, and what does Glinda tell her? She says, follow the yellow brick road, right? You got to go to Oz. Well, how do I get to Oz? Well, you follow the yellow brick road. Just follow the yellow brick road. It was a real catchy little tune, part of the movie. And so what did Dorothy and her dog Toto did? They followed that yellow brick road. And although they ran into obstacles along the way, they ran into a few strange characters along the way, she just kept following that yellow brick road, and she eventually wound up at Oz. She didn't get to Oz because anything within her own power. She didn't get to Oz because there was anything great or wonderful about her. She didn't get to Oz because of the characters that were with her. They were kind of a ragtag bunch, if you remember. She got to Oz because she followed the yellow brick road. She followed the path that led to Oz. That's why she got to Oz. Wouldn't it be great if there was a yellow brick road that would lead us anywhere we wanted to go in life? Can you imagine a yellow brick road that would lead us to a happy marriage? What about a yellow brick road that led us to financial security? How about a yellow brick road that led us to better health? Or maybe a yellow brick road that would lead us to a better relationship with a family member or friend who we've had a falling out with? What about a yellow brick road that led us out of the valley of guilt or shame? Well, that yellow brick road actually exists, and it's called Jesus. Jesus is our yellow brick road, and this, I brought my Bible that's together today. I have another one, but the pages come out of it, so I didn't want them falling while I was up here. So this is a little bigger Bible, but anyway, this is our yellow brick road for all parts of our life, and every phase of our life, this can tell us the path, the destination for us to go to get. This can give us the direction to go to get to our destination. This is our path. Jesus is our path. So there is a yellow brick road that will lead us there. As you evaluate where you are professionally, financially, relationally, spiritually, isn't it true that when you look back in your life, you look far enough back, if you've lived long enough and you had enough experience, you look back in your life, you can kind of see how these paths that you were on led you to where you're at today. Because of the choices you made, the paths you were on, they lead you to where you're at today. For instance, if you look at your life financially, you've been on a path that's led you to where you are today. Now, there may have been a few things that happened along the way that might have, you didn't have much control over, but you stayed on the path and you wound up where you're at today. It was probably because a sequence of events that, you stayed on this same path. Now, that path may have led to financial security, and you're in a great spot today. That path may have led to financial insecurity, and you're drowning in debt. And so you're not in a great spot today. Either way, you followed a path that got you to where you are today. What's true financially, it's also true relationally, spiritually, academically, as we talked about. And so sometimes it's not so easy to see that path, though, while we're in it. It's easier to look back on our life, right? We can see, okay, I made some mistakes here. I got off this path, or I was on the wrong path. It's also easy to look at somebody else's life. You've probably been listening to somebody tell you a story before about they wound up in a bad spot, right? And they're telling you how they got to that bad spot. And somewhere during that story, while they're talking to you, you probably thought, man, you should have seen this coming. You've already figured out in your head where this story's going before they tell you the end result, right? You see because you know the path that they were on. So it's easy when we're looking at somebody else's life. It's easy when we look back on our own. It's a little harder when we're in the present of our own lives or when we're trying to plan for the future. Looking ahead, oftentimes we're deceived into thinking that life is just a series of unrelated decisions, and somehow we're going to wind up to where we want to be. Maybe it be through our sheer will, or we're going to will it to happen. Or maybe it's just by luck that it's going to happen. Or some people just think, oh, we'll just go down this road and it's all going to work out somehow. But if you can see a path in the rearview mirror, if you can see a path that others have followed, then you can also see a path in your current situation, where you're at now, if you'll just look for it. So here's the main thought in all this. Okay, the one thing I want you to get today is that direction, not intention, determines our destination. Okay? You can have the best intentions in the world, but if you go down a direction that doesn't lead to that destination, you're not going to get there. And that applies whether it's relational or financial, spiritual, any of that. So once again, direction, not intention, determines our destination. Thinking about that now, let's take another look at this scripture that King Solomon wrote. Like I said, we don't know if he was writing about himself or he was actually seeing this young man. So in Proverbs chapter 7, verse 6 and 7, he says, "At the window of my house I looked out through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men a youth who lacked judgment." Now, how did he know he lacked judgment? Well, it's probably because he was a youth. You know, youths, they haven't lived long enough to have good experience. They haven't lived long enough to have life's examples right. And so, and I say could make right decisions, right? They haven't lived long enough to get those experiences and that they could make good choices, could choose good paths, because just because you've had life experiences, just because you've lived a long time, doesn't mean that you are going to make the right choice and go down the right path. But it certainly helps. He goes on in 8 and 9. He says, "He was going down the street, near a street corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in." Now, you really don't have to be real biblically smart to figure out what's going on here. You know, this guy, young man, he was going to this lady's house. He knew her. He knew where she was going to be at. He's heading in her direction. He probably knew her husband was away, but later we find out she tells him anyway, just in case he didn't. And that alone, just all those things that we just mentioned, that alone should have stopped him in his tracks and made him go around the other way, right? Because where he was heading was down a bad path. But it didn't. It was actually the very reason that he was going that direction. Let's continue. "Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. She's loud and defiant. Her feet stay at home, now in the street, now in the squares. At every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him. With brazen face she said, 'I have fellowship offerings at my home today. Today I fulfilled my vows, so I came out to meet you. I looked for you and have found you. I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us drink of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love.' And just in case the young man didn't know already that her husband was gone, she says, 'My husband is not home. He's gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money, and he will not be home till full moon.'" Now, this young man was probably thinking, all right, this is just, you know, in his head, he's probably thinking, this is just what I was hoping for. Now listen to 21 and 23. "With persuasive words she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her like an ox going to slaughter." Now that doesn't sound like a good thing, does it? I mean, he was probably thinking this is going to be great, and Solomon is telling him, you're like an ox, it's about to be slaughtered. "Like a deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces its liver. Like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him what? It'll cost him his life." The direction or the path that this young man has chosen is going to cost him his life. Now at this point in the story, Solomon changes who he's talking to. Now he's talking to us. So look at 24 and 25. He's talking to us. He says that, "Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths." There's our word again, paths. "Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng." Notice he said many. There was nothing unique about what this young man was experiencing. He wasn't the first. There were many before him. He won't be the last. There are many after him. He goes on into 27. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Yes, a highway. It's wide, it's big, and many people have traveled it before and many afterwards. This young man who wanted his relationships to be richer, he chose a path that would actually undermine and tear down his relationships. A young man who wanted something good, he chose a path, or he went a direction that chose something bad, that led to a destination that was bad. It was predetermined. Everybody that's watching from the outside, watching what's happening, Solomon watching from above, watching what's happening, he knows where this is leading. It's leading to destruction. Now you might be thinking, well, Clay, that's a pretty extreme example that you're talking about today. I've never done that, nor would I. And of course it was for effect. That's why that example is there. But let's consider some other examples. Let's try to bring it home, and maybe you can relate to a few of these examples. A single woman says, I want to meet and marry one day a Christian guy who's really got his act together. But she dates whoever is cute and whoever will ask her out, and maybe whoever's got money. You could say something similar for a young man who wants to marry a Christian woman and one day marry this Christian woman. But he dates whoever's popular or whoever he can find at the honky-tonks or bars that will go home with him. A married woman says, I want to have a great relationship with my husband, yet she makes the children the priority of her life and not her husband. A married man says, I want to have a great relationship with my wife, but when he has his days off, he goes and hangs out with his buddies, and he's taking care of his own interests, looking after his own interests, and not at home with his wife. A Christian man or woman says, I want to develop a deep and lasting relationship with God. But then they get up every morning and the first thing they do is they look at TikTok or YouTube and watch memes and things that have nothing to do with God. They rarely ever read their Bible. A man says, I want to grow old and invest the latter years of my life with my grandchildren, yet he neglects his health in such ways that shortens his life. A newlywed couple says, I want to be financially secure. By the time I'm my parents' age, we want to be financially secure. But they adopt a lifestyle that's outside their means. They spend more than they can make. They load up the credit cards, and before too long, they're drowning in debt. A high school freshman, we have a few young folks in here, or college folks in here. So a high school freshman says, I want to make good grades, and I want to get a scholarship and get to go to a good college and have scholarship, have my school paid for. And yet, they neglect their studies and don't give the attention needed to their studies, so their grades suffer. A young married couple says, we want our children to develop a personal relationship with God and choose friends who have done the same. And yet that young married couple, they take their children to the lake on a lot of Sundays, or maybe to football games or baseball games, instead of going to church and raising their kids up in church. Obviously, the list could go on. You're probably thinking of some others that you could add to the list yourself right now, but I'm going to stop there. The people on this list that I just mentioned, all these examples, they all had really good intentions. If you notice the first statement, their intentions, they were great intentions. That's what they wanted to do. Everybody would say, boy, that's great. But like the young, naive man in Solomon's story, the paths they chose led them to a destination that was anything but where they wanted to be. So, I won't go back through all of them, but let's just take two of them. If you want to make good grades in school, choose the right path. Pay attention. How do you do that? Well, pay attention in class, right? Study at home. Get a good night's sleep the night before you take a test. Seems pretty simple, right? But those are the things that we don't always do, and because of that, we choose a path that takes us to a destination we don't want. If you want to have a better relationship with God, well, choose the right path. Go a direction that leads towards God. What is that? Spending time in this, okay? Reading God's Word, coming to church, being around other people that do the same. Most of y'all know that I work shift work. I'm on a 8-day schedule and there's only 7 days in a week. And because of that, you take any one day of the week and I will be working that day 4 weeks in a row and I'll be off 4 weeks in a row. So that's why y'all see me 4 weeks in a row and then you don't see me 4 weeks in a row on Sunday because I'm at work. And I can tell you for a fact that the 4 weeks that I'm off, I'm not as close to God as the 4 weeks that I'm here at church. Why is that? It just makes sense. I'm around people that, my friends, my family, other folks that believe in God, other folks that lift me up, that help me. We studied together like we did this morning in Sunday school. It just makes sense. So we could go back through each one of these examples that I mentioned this morning, and I could give you a path, a direction that would lead to your intention. But I won't go through those. I think most of us can probably figure them out. And if you can't, if you're a young person, if you need some help, seek out the advice of an older person that can help you to know how to make good decisions. I know oftentimes as young people, we don't always want to listen to adults. I didn't when I was a youth, and I know my boys didn't when they were youths, and you young folks might do the same, but I would encourage you to listen to your parents or seek the advice of another older person that might be able to help you go down the right path to reach your destination. As I've been talking to you today, you might have been thinking, I know this person, they needed to hear this message today. They weren't here and they needed to hear it. You might be thinking about somebody else. But I would encourage you to do a self-examination. Maybe there's some part of your life that you've been on a direction that's leading you to a path that you really don't want to end up at. I would encourage you to change that. If you're walking this way and the direction you want to go is that way, just turn around and go the right direction. So, are there any disconnects in your life? Are there any discrepancies between the desires of your heart, your intentions, and then what you're ultimately doing? Is there an alignment between your intentions and your direction? The principle of the path, it's operating every day, whether we know it or not, whether we admit it or not. We've already mentioned that. In each of these paths, they lead to a predictable destination. So ask yourself, am I heading to the right path where I want to be? And then I want to encourage everybody and remind everybody, let's get back to Jesus, okay? So Jesus is the best path. Jesus is the best path of all that we can follow. I looked up on my phone, I typed in 2 words on my phone, on my Bible app. I typed in, follow me. And my goodness, the page came up. There was all kind of verses in the Bible where Jesus said, follow me. We won't go there, but 2 of them right quick. John 1:43, Jesus said to Philip, follow me. 2 simple words, right? Luke 9:59, Jesus said to another man, follow me. And he said this many, many times. What does that mean, to follow Jesus? What that means is that we're saying we're no longer in control. I give control to you, Jesus. Okay, that's what that means in everything. I'm no longer in control of my finances. I give that to Jesus. I'm no longer in control of my relationships. I give that to Jesus. Okay, I want to encourage you this morning to give it all to Jesus. What about eternally speaking? If you were to die today, are you going to go to heaven? Looking around, most of us are home folks, and that's probably a yes for most of us. But if there's somebody here today that doesn't know God, you can do that today before you leave this building. In John 14:6, Jesus made it clear how we get to heaven. It's through Him. He says, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So what He's saying here very plainly is that the only way to get to heaven is through Him. If you haven't done that today, if you haven't done that in your life up to this point, you can do that today before you leave. Maybe at some point in your life you've decided to follow Jesus. But maybe there's some some phase of your life that you've gone down a direction, you followed a path that's led you to a destination that you really don't want to be at. Maybe you'd just like to talk with somebody about that today, pray with somebody about that today. Again, now's the time to do that. Let's have a time of invitation. Let's have a time of just prayer between you and God. And I would ask that each person here today just do as God leads you to, okay?